Okay, we are with Dr Camilla Nord for our next Q&A for our VICTA Virtual Science Fair. Camilla, you are from the University of Cambridge. You are a neuroscientist. I know nothing about neuroscience. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Yes, of course. So neuroscience is this really broad umbrella field that can mean loads of different things. My sort of specific subtype of neuroscientist is I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, which means I work with humans, and the types of experiments I do typically involve putting people inside brain scanners and measuring what their brain activation does while they're doing different things inside the scanner. So it's these kind of experiments that a couple decades ago led to our understanding of where in the human brain is involved in listening and seeing things and all the other processes that can happen inside the human brain. My specific specialty is actually in mental health and neuroscience and what changes in your brain when you're experiencing mental health difficulties.
Wow, it sounds absolutely fascinating because the depth that you could go into when you're in your studying and your research must be incredible.
I feel that my depth is quite shallow compared to my colleagues who do animal neuroscience, where you can record directly from neurons. That's very unusual to be able to do in humans. The only situation that you can is if someone is having surgery for epilepsy, then sometimes they'll volunteer to be a part of studies. And then you can do these really incredible recordings from neurons in humans. Otherwise, we have to make inferences from brain scans that are imperfect, whereas the kind of depth of data that people get from direct neural recordings in animals can tell you a lot more on the individual cellular level than unfortunately a brain scan can.
Okay. And how did you get into it all? Because it's not something that you can just fall into. It's something that you've got to have a real passion and interest in, I imagine.
I actually had no idea how much I would like research. I thought I would quite like to be some kind of doctor, maybe like a neurologist. So I knew I liked brains, maybe around the time I was 20, 21. And I knew I liked brains, and I knew I was interested in the idea that differences in your brain could manifest as differences in your behavior, and then I suppose as different kinds of disorders. So I was really interested in that. And then I went and did some research in a lab at University College London. And this lab was doing what I described. It was putting people experiencing a major depressive episode inside a brain scanner and measuring activation in a very small region of the brain, which they'd had to do all kinds of sort of special physics stuff with the scanner to get it to measure, and was able to show this really interesting difference in this bit of the brain in depression that could be crucial to developing new treatments, to having a better understanding of depression. And it was that experience working in that lab that made me realize that this was, well, one, like a career, but two, something that I was actually genuinely really interested in. And what I love most, I think, about my job is that it involves lots of different types of things that you're doing during the day. So I have these kind of major questions I'm interested in. And then what's different about being a scientist from being another kind of academic, I think, is then you have to basically figure out some technical way to answer those questions. And often this involves learning things that I have no idea about. So I'm frequently like, okay, I'm really interested in this question. And then I'm sort of like, okay, well, how do we measure that? And what kind of technologies exist to manipulate that or to change that? And then I have to go and learn about that and find people who are experts in that just to be able to answer my question. So I'm constantly having to learn slightly new things in order to sort of ask what I think is the next question in my sort of stream of thought.
So would that be your sort of average day to day, your average week, where you have your big questions that you're trying to answer, and then sort of each day sort of breaking it down into all the different areas that you need to research and go into?
Yeah, I mean, it takes usually years to answer one question, but in a given week, I guess then you would be breaking it down even further. So a big part of my job is programming. So you would be maybe like writing code to analyze data, or writing code to put some kind of experiment online, which is what we're currently doing in the time of COVID, not scanning any brains at the moment. People do little computer games online, and then we collect detailed behavioral data, things like how quickly they respond to stimuli, what they'll choose between two different stimuli, and that tells us things about how people learn and how people make decisions, and then we can eventually extrapolate that to the biology of learning and making decisions.
It sounds like a really fascinating and interesting area that before we started talking, I didn't really know too much about. But a lot of the young people that will be watching this may start to develop an interest in this career or into this area. What advice would you give anyone that would be interested in sort of pursuing this route?
I think the advice I would give is to try lots of different things in this general space. So let's imagine you're interested in mental health or brain disorders, as I was, and I was sort of aware that you could basically be a doctor who treats it, and that was, I think, it of what I was aware. But in fact, the colleagues that I work with, yes, some are neurologists where you treat patients with Parkinson's disease or Huntington's disease. Some are psychiatrists where you treat patients with depression or with schizophrenia. Some are clinical psychologists, where you do kind of detailed cognitive behavioral techniques to help treat patients with various mental health disorders. And then many like me are what you would call basic scientists, which means what we do is research. And I'm not a clinician, I'm not a practicing clinician, although I am really interested in developing new treatments. And all these kind of different ways of getting at similar questions involve totally different day-to-day lives. And so I think it's quite important to basically expose yourself to what's out there, what satisfies you, what are your abilities kind of like in tune with the most. Actually, I'm bad at loads of stuff in my job, but that's fine because there's so many things that you just have to be like good on average, and then make yourself good at the things that you're not naturally attuned at, because you could never be perfect in everything.
I suppose it's quite a scientific way of doing it, isn't it? Trial and error.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for speaking to us as part of the virtual science fair. It was great to catch up with you. And thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome.